Anyway, since the Brexit vote, there have been apparently rises in racism. An op-ed piece that's pretty cool that's in the Toronto Star today. Martin Reg Cohen wrote this. Canada shouldn't be smug looking at anti-immigrant sentiment of Brexit. In other words, it's easy for us to sit and take in refugees and claim that we got it all figured out. But as Mr. Cohen writes in his article, if our well-publicized impulse to resettle Syrian refugees is more orderly and dignified than what has happened in southern Europe with their barbed wire borders, it is because our roads and railways are not overrun by migrants clamoring for processing on our doorstep. Who knows how Canadians would behave if geography did not insulate us from the human tide along the shores of the Mediterranean or the porous border between Mexico and the United States. To talk more about all of this, Gary Dierenfeld is with us, social worker, yoursocialworker.com. He is with us now. Hello, Gary. How are you today?
I'm good, Scott. That's a pretty good argument he puts forward, you know.
It is. I thought it was fascinating. It's easy to sit and boast your 25,000 refugees, but we certainly don't have the same situation here as what's occurring in Europe.
Well, you know what? We may have it after Trump gets elected with the Americans pushing through our border.
That's right. We could get everybody coming from Mexico north.
Yeah. So you know, the bottom line is we can't be smug here in Canada thinking we are so far removed from what's happening in Britain. And you know, one of the reminders of that is our last federal election. You know, there you had Harper trying to make a big deal out of the burqa and trying to create divisions through race, culture, and ethnicity with Muslims on that basis. And, you know, fortunately, we here in Canada, we voted against that. I really think that Harper's attempt to be divisive through racism was a key factor in a backlash that got Trudeau in.
So are you saying that everybody that questions someone who wears a face covering is a racist?
No, I'm not saying that at all. But I am saying that I thought Harper was playing on a race card and seeking to magnify those differences. And what I'm also saying by that is that shows that can play here in Canada too, that we can raise those issues, that we can bring out the worst in us at election time anyways. And so we can't be smug. We always have to be vigilant against racism, bigotry, prejudice.
It's interesting because when Trump first heard the results of Brexit, he was congratulating the UK for taking back their country. I was talking to one political scientist earlier on today and said this may work against him as time goes by and people realize the fiscal economic fallout of all of this that's happening. Do you think that this, in the end, could work for all of this? Could spread the love, peace, and show to everybody this is not the way to go?
Well, you know, I do hope this works against Trump. I think the UK is getting a bitter dose of reality right now and coming to realize that those people, those immigrant people, they brought their money. And they brought lots of money. And they were not stealing jobs from anyone. They were just willing to do the jobs that other people weren't willing to do. And so there will be a tremendous backlash. I think Britain is going to suffer horribly for years to come. And if the Americans wake up to that, that may unseat Trump.
You know, we had a call from a listener, a very intelligent man earlier on, that said that we're reporting all of the negative, and that let's not forget the majority of people voted to leave. And again, as you know, as Mr. Cohen writes in his article, you know, we certainly don't have the situation that they have there, where our roads or railways are being overrun and the mad dash is on to process these people. Are we labeling half the population incorrectly?
Well, you know, we can't tar and feather the whole population or half the population as racist for voting to leave, but we do have to appreciate that the Leave campaign was predicated on suggesting there was a problem with immigration, and that there were a problem with, quote, those people. And that is racist in and of itself. You get Trump south of the border claiming racism because a judge with Mexican past rules against him.
Yeah.
Well, you know what? That's even the Republicans came out and said that's just out and out racism. So there is a backlash. In the UK, we're seeing a dramatic rise in violence against visible minorities. It's as if racism has come out of the closet and has been enabled. This is very scary for me.
Why does there seem to be more racial tensions there or in the U.S. than there is here?
Well,
are we better, or again, are we just not in that environment?
I got to give props to the author of that article. It was it Andrew Cohen?
Martin Reg Cohen, yeah.
Martin Cohen. He correctly points out that we don't have a border that people are clamoring to cross and flood us, with people. We do not have that experience. So we can sit back and smugly say we're not like them. It just might be that if we had a common border with a country that was, I don't know what the right word was, but they're trying to immigrate extensively to us, we may have that same kind of racist leanings. We can't be so smug. But having said that, I would like to think there's something about being Canadian, that there is something in the water we drink that is more tolerant and more accepting. And typically, that has been the Canadian way.
You talked about how we can't be smug. I remember when the campaign, our last election campaign, and bringing in 25,000 refugees and processing them in a short period of time. I remember Minister McCallum saying, let's shoot for 50. And I did think that was smug. And here's the reason. Of course, we have to help people as they flee for their lives. How can we not? I mean, we have a history of this. But it seems that we're more looking for the photo op with a refugee than we are at trying to solve the problem, which is causing these people to run for their lives and flee with just the clothes on their backs from the place where they are from. And I would suggest that most don't want to flee for their lives. Are we spending too much time talking about this problem after the fact as opposed to trying to stop the mad flee of people moving across Europe or any part of the world?
Right. So, there's a part of me that can't argue with you that John McCallum may very well have been looking for the photo op and riding a wave of Canadian sentiment that said, let's do something, and he wanted to be poster boy and be perceived as being on the top of his game with that.
But are we fooling ourselves to say that we're really doing something when we're bringing in a small drop in the bucket of the millions of people who are being displaced on a daily basis? Instead of going and addressing the problem, which is helping these people stay in their homeland.
Right. So hopefully we're doing some of both, quite frankly, and that's why we participate, or Canada participates with NATO partners, with the U.S., in activities abroad and activities in the Middle East to hopefully, over time, bring about peace. So it's not an either-or proposition, it's a that-and proposition.
Mm-hmm.
So we are.
But let's be honest, Gary. Until we get things settled in Syria, this problem is going nowhere. Like, there is no solution.
And no one would disagree with that. So this is a worldwide conundrum, and the whole world is reeling from that. But is 50,000, is 25,000 a drop in the bucket? Yes and no. It's a drop in the bucket in terms of the total number of refugees seeking asylum. It is a gallant effort on the part of Canada, a population of 32, 33 million, whereas the United States suggested they would bring in some 10,000, a population of, 250 to 300 million, and I think that's why they've only brought in about 2,500, by the way. So we have made a remarkable effort, and it's not just Canada. There are countless other countries out there who could do something similar.
Well, and you bring up a valid point, Gary, and I think this is the problem that's in Europe. Europe is saturated.
Yes,
it's saturated,
and the lion's share. Germany has bent over backwards. This will change the landscape of what Germany is and what Germany looks like over time. And it would be nice if the responsibility for humanitarian aid was shared more reasonably through many more countries throughout.
It's not that, that this is bad. Of course, like I said, you have to help people. You have to feed people. But again, unless you're willing to take the rest of the world into your borders, you can't displace countries this way.
Right. Right. So
and not only that, it's where is Syria left? Because you know what we're doing? We're plucking the best and the brightest out of these countries. And then who's left to rebuild them?
Yeah.
And then we wonder why terrorism fills the vacuum.
So again, I can't argue with your thinking. We're on.
No, there is no answer to these questions, Gary.
There is no answer. But the issue that got us going is this concern for racism.
Mm-hmm.
And when resources get tight, people get scared.
Yeah.
And they want to hoard their resources. And in hoarding their resources, we want to hoard our resources for people like us, for people with whom we have a relationship. And so that will be our immediate family and who we perceive to be Canadian. And then beyond that, we don't want to share as easily lest we lose some of our resources. And so this is what's happening in these countries and in the world today, that they are worried about losing valuable resources, and as such, we're now targeting visible minorities to get out of Dodge. That's very scary for the visible minorities. Quite frankly, I don't like to see that in my friends and neighbors either.
Obviously, in the UK, the pendulum has swung hard to one direction. How long is it going to come back? How long is it going to take to come back to the center?
And isn't that the $64,000 question? Don't have a crystal ball, but I think you're going to be looking at years because, this next party that gets in Britain will have the mandate of dismantling itself from the European Union. That will be a process of several years. That government will be in for a good 4 or so years, may get reelected again. And so I think Britain is in for a good decade of turmoil.
Obviously, half the population happy, half the population upset.
No. Half the population may have voted to leave, but so it seems they've woken up with buyer's remorse.
Well, yeah, but we also have to underline seems in all of that because, again, you can set the question up whatever way you want. At the end, I don't disagree with you at all, but, at the end, we still have an extremely divided country.
Yeah.
Because whether you changed your mind or not, you have to take responsibility for your vote. So how do people bridge this gap? How do they move on? How do they move forward? Especially when there doesn't appear to be a leader, and it seems like it's floating rudderlessly at this point.
Yeah. So, and that's why it's going to take years to move on. If I were an immigrant or a visible minority in Britain, I would be quite concerned for my business, quite concerned for my safety. And no matter how much lipstick you put on a pig, it's still a pig. And so I don't care what Cameron has to say. It's not that I don't care. We can see past it and know that there's going to be a lot of turmoil, upset, and I think quite divisive harm in Britain.
Here's a question from an emailer, Eric. His name is Eric. Your guest claims that they are, quote, coming with money. That is false. The majority of migrants are set up in refugee centers and camps and collect welfare, draining an already strained welfare system. They set up no-go zones, which are not good for the host nation. Greece and Italy have high unemployment and are financially strained, yet are forced to take migrants. To want to protect one's heritage is not racist. Liberals, like your guest, attack European nations and Trump for trying to keep countries, to try to keep their countries, yet they say nothing about the cultures in the Middle East who are blatantly committing more social injustice than any other nations. Germany's landscape has changed, not for the better. NATO and the UN need to find a way to build those nations, Libya, Syria, etc., instead of spreading the population throughout the world. As for Britain, she will be fine. NATO and the UN need to find a way to build those nations rather than spreading the population throughout the world. What are your thoughts?
That's the only line that I really like in what that emailer had to say, quite frankly.
But that final line is a valid point.
That's a very valid point, and you and I went over that a bit. It's going to be a tough nut to crack, but those are the problems that have to be resolved. They won't be resolved for years to come, and in the meantime, people need to be fed. And while we stand on the one side of the fence that has the food, let's develop some empathy here, because, and this is where I take umbrage, where I take issue with the email writer, it reeks of lack of empathy. So if it was me, if it was him or her, whoever the email writer was, whose family was doing without food, would you not want to be rescued? Would you not hope that somebody would share their what they had, their food, with you? And so we have to take a look at things, not just from our perspective, what might we be giving up, but what would we want somebody to give up in order to help us? These people are dying. These people are drowning in despair. And to castigate them by saying simply go home, that's not the answer. That for me, there's nothing humanitarian about that. And if the shoe were on the other foot, what would you be doing?
What can we or other countries, other leaders, other politicians, what can we learn from this experience, do you think?
Well, you know, there's a good question, and I think what we have to learn here in Canada, and is we have to be careful not to push too hard, too far in accepting immigrants. And I can't believe that I just said that. Here's what I mean by that. I don't want us to push so hard that we create a backlash, because that won't be good either. So there is a bit of a balancing act between those who are, like myself, more liberal-minded. You know, I see that as a good thing. I think it was used as an insult. More humanitarian-minded. We have to balance that against those who would be fearful about losing and giving up resources, that we don't spook those folks so badly that they create the kind of backlash that gives rise to a Donald Trump, or that did give rise to a Stephen Harper. So we do have to be mindful of how helpful we can be in any given society.
Gary Dierenfeld has been with us, social worker, yoursocialworker.com, to find out more, talking about the Brexit vote and how people are coping since. Gary, as always, thanks for the time. Much appreciated.